Then, if the fast is going to be somewhat more strict, along with those things are eliminated fish, though it's interesting. I want to hit all the details here, even if they seem small. Because these rules were worked out by the people in the early centuries of the church, by fish they meant those creatures of the sea that had blood and bones. If a creature did not have blood and bones, it was not considered to be a fish, so they thought it was okay to eat it on fasting days. But fish, wine, and that means all fermented drinks, all drinks that contain alcohol, and oil. And if you've been looking at the church calendar that has the fasting regulations printed, you'll see that there's a kind of what appears sometimes to contemporary Western people as being almost a preoccupation with wine and oil. In some senses, this is a reflection of the Mediterranean world in which the church grew up. You know, where wine and oil are so basic to the diet there. So whether you do have it or whether you do not have it during a fasting season or a fasting day is a significant thing. So then, during a strict fasting season or day when all of these things are eliminated, one is left with bread, and that means bread prepared without dairy products, bread, vegetables, and if it's a day that there's no oil, it means vegetables prepared very simply, usually by boiling or steaming and not cooked in oil, which is considered more luxurious. Fruit, grain, nuts, honey, things like that, which all together comprise what your friendly local cardiologist would say is a very healthy diet, as a matter of fact. Now, if you are tempted to think that this is a very austere expression, I will read to you a little bit of how Lent was observed among the Christians. And here we're not talking, by the way, just incidentally, sometimes people think that the fasting regulations were things that were worked out by monks and really only applied to monks, and they don't really apply to people in the world. Well, historically speaking, there's no justification for such a claim, that for most part the fasting rule was worked out by Christian people who lived in cities like us. They may not have had their diet may have been different from ours. That's true. They didn't eat as much meat normally as we eat. But in any case, here's a description of Lent in Jerusalem, 4th century. These are their customs of fasting in Lent, and this comes from that journal of the Spanish pilgrim Aguirre that I mentioned before, the book Aguirre's Travels. There are some who eat nothing during the whole week between their meal on Sunday and the one they have on Saturday. That means Monday through Friday didn't have anything at all. They are the ones who keep a week. And though they eat on Saturday morning, they do not eat again in the evening, but only on the next day, Sunday, and then nothing more till the following Saturday, as I have described. Then there are those who cannot fast a whole week in the way I have described, and they eat a dinner halfway through the week on Thursday. Then there are those who cannot manage this, and they eat on 2 days of the week. Then there are those who cannot manage this, and they have a meal every day. No one lays down how much is to be done, but each person does what he can. Those who keep the full rule are not praised, and those who do less are not criticized. That is how things are done here. And this is what they eat during the Lenten season. If you think the present rule as I've described it now is tough. And this is in addition to not eating any kind of animal food. They are not so much as to taste a crumb of bread, nor oil either, or anything which grows on trees, only water and gruel. So that was Lent in Jerusalem in the 4th century. So compared to that, we have it quite nice. So the ascetical fasting then, which again, its most basic purpose is the lightening of the diet. Ask anyone. There are many people that you can speak to in the church who who attempts to keep the fast pretty much by the established pattern that the Church has given us, and they will tell you that it indeed does have this effect of lightening the body. It makes prayer, it makes the time in church easier. It makes it easier to focus on spiritual things. It also has its temptations. The saints tell us, they remind us that just as Jesus in his fast, because he had no sin inside him, he encounters at the end of his fast the devil who comes to him from the outside. See? But when we fast, we not only have to contend with the devil and the demons who come to us from the outside, but it stirs up all of the evil that is in us, the effects of sin within us, our passions and disordered desires. They all come up, and the saints would say they have to come up in order for us to throw them out. So one should experience this. One should expect to experience this spiritual struggle during the fast. Now, so there is this. The ascetical fasting then is this simplification of the diet, and also can involve the reduction of the amount of food that's eaten. Often it's the case during the strict fast season, during the Great Lent, that on the weekdays we are to attempt to restrict ourselves to one meal a day, traditionally taken in the evening. All of these details are presented as the year goes by. Now, it is the understanding, the experience of the Church, that everybody who is physically healthy, and even those who are not to the extent that they are able, and concession has always been made for those who are not, whether we're talking about small children, very old people, the infirm, mothers who are pregnant and nursing their babies, all these conditions are listed even in very ancient writings of the Church, and there's always been concessions made for them, because again, we don't have a law, we have a standard or a rule. But the experience of the Church has been that everyone needs this periodic and regular practice of fasting in order that the tyranny of this life, pursuing the things of this life, the cares of this world, selfish preoccupations, can be broken. It's a tool in breaking it. And the pursuit of the spiritual life, the desire to feed on God, to be hungry for God, can be encouraged. That's why we fast. And that's why the Church gives us fasting seasons in which we undertake this ascetical fast of reducing the food and simplifying the diet for a certain period of time. And there are 4 seasons each year when we do this. The first, the greatest, is that which we call the Great Lent, the season, the 40 days that precede Holy Week. Holy Week, of course, is the week before Easter, the week before Pascha. And the 40 days before Holy Week and the Holy Week itself are the greatest of the Church's fasting seasons. And it is during that season that the rule is the most strict. Then we have 3 other seasons that are shorter and have a lighter rule. We have, first of all, the season before Christmas, the season before the birth of the Lord, which customarily, this one has been of various lengths throughout the history of the Church. At present, officially, its length is 40 days, which means it's already begun. We're already in it. It begins on the 15th of November. However, in North America, among some of the Orthodox, this is kind of unofficially, but there has been the practice of shortening it a little bit and beginning it after the beloved celebration of Thanksgiving has passed, and starting it on the feast of St. Andrew the Apostle, the 30th of November. That day has been chosen by some because it's the first day when in the liturgical services of the Church we speak of preparing to celebrate the birth of the Lord. But officially the fast to prepare for the Nativity begins on the 15th of November. And as you'll see when you get your new grapevine, the one that just got sent out today, the rule for the fast during that period is printed there in detail. And that's the rule that as now that you are catechumens, you should look at this particular fasting season as not only the fast preparing for the celebration of the birth and the baptism of the Lord at Nativity and Theophany, but you should also see this one particularly as special to you, in that it's your entry into this discipline of fasting to prepare yourself for those great and awesome mysteries that will be accomplished in you, the receiving the forgiveness of sins through your first confession, and then entering into the communion of the church through baptism and the gift of the Holy Spirit at chrismation, so that finally you will be united to the body and blood of the Lord. So I would encourage you to take this fasting season seriously. Then there are two other shorter periods of fasting in the summer. There is one that goes from after the celebration of Pentecost until the feast of the apostles Peter and Paul on June 29th. And this is a very varying length. Sometimes it's very short, and sometimes it's a couple weeks, depending on how late Easter is and how late Pentecost comes. So it's a variable length. And then there is a fast that is kept in August, the first 14 days of August, in honor of the Mother of God, to prepare us to celebrate the greatest of her feasts, her dormition, her passing from, as the hymns say, from life to death to fullness of life in the kingdom of God. Sometimes this feast of the dormition of the Mother of God is called her Pascha, her Easter. So there is a little Lent that precedes it to prepare us for it. Then, in addition to these seasons, there is, now we mentioned that we have the inheritance of the early church, that on Wednesday and Friday we are to fast absolutely until the ninth hour, those who are able, and then after that time we eat, but the food that is taken on Wednesday and Friday is to follow the fasting rule, that it's to be food for fasting day, that it doesn't include those things that we abstain from on fasting days. So it's a simple vegetarian meal. Then there are also a few special fast days that come throughout the year. Days in one day, September 14th, the exaltation of the cross. The cross being an invitation to unite oneself to the ascetic life and to join oneself with Christ crucified, so it's observed with fasting. A day such as on August 29th, the day of the beheading of St. John the Baptist, in the midst of Herod's birthday party and revelry, so the church has responded to that by observing it as a fasting day. And all of these are enumerated on the church calendar, and we speak of them when we announce the services that are coming for each week. So that's how the ascetical fast is observed in the church. So this then is this summary is meant to introduce you to this most important Orthodox practice. And fasting has a place among the Orthodox that it has long ceased having among the non-Orthodox Christians. For over half actually of the existence of Christianity in this world, Christians everywhere kept the same basic fasting rule. It's only in the modern centuries that the traditional fast, much of it was discarded by the Church in the West, by the Roman Catholics, even before the Protestant Reformation. And then, even though it cannot be said that one does not find the practice of fasting among the Reformation churches, among Protestants, there have always been those who fast. But as a common expression of the life of the church, it long since ceased to exist, although even in Puritan America there were public days of prayer and fasting. So, but the expression of the fast for all the reasons that we fast, as I enumerated at the beginning of the talk, one cannot find that anymore outside the Orthodox Church. So, for someone who is coming into the church, it's an important thing, because this observance of fasting, it hits us where we feel it. Something that we feel very directly when we do it. And for that reason, it's important. It's not to be seen as an end in itself. It's not to be seen in a legalistic or pharisaical way. It's not to be understood that doing these things guarantees one of being a spiritual and holy person. Rather, it's an expression of love, hunger, thirst for God, wanting to conform oneself to the life of Christ, who knowing nothing, like St. Paul says, but Jesus Christ and Him crucified. It's following the way of the church and the way of the saints. All of those whom we see on the walls of the church in the icons are those who kept this discipline as an expression of their desire to attain purification from sin and union with God, and growing in the likeness of the death and resurrection of the Lord. So that's why we do it. The rule of the fast is to be taken seriously in the church. I like to conclude making this distinction between the law and the rule as standard. Bishop Kallistos Ware in England has a very good description of it, in which he says, "The rules of the fast, while they are to be understood seriously, are never to be interpreted with what he calls dour and pedantic legalism." And that's how we are to accept them as well. If any person in the church has a question about how the fasting rule should be applied in his own life, he should seek the advice of his fellow Christians, and especially his spiritual father, the priest. That we're not supposed to make decisions independently on our own about those things. We're to seek advice. And it can be, in some cases, that certain expressions of the fast do not apply to a certain person. And likewise, although you might think this astonishing, the teachers of the church say that we should especially seek the advice of the spiritual father should we have the desire to do something over and above the rule of the church, in addition to, as many saints have throughout the ages. But in order that we might be saved from the danger of pride, because no one should be so deluded as to think that the perfect fulfilling of the rule of the church's fast is anything to boast in, anything to be proud of, because then we end up like the Pharisee. There's a story that's often told from the life of Saint Anthony, when the devil spoke to Saint Anthony and says, "There is only one way in which I am not like you." He said, "You hardly ever eat, but I don't eat at all. You hardly ever sleep. You pray through the night. I don't sleep at all. But how you have overcome me is through your humility." So it is through the practice of fasting in the church is to lead us to that humility and purity of heart and love for God and love for the other. If it's doing that, then it's accomplishing its task. That's what it's for. It's a means to an end, a means to be taken seriously in the church and used. We're never to say, "Oh, this doesn't apply to me living in 20th century America," or anything like that. We are to live through this in our lives. It's a way for us, especially in a very godless, worldly, and affluent society, of setting ourselves apart as the people that are called from this world, called from a life of preoccupation of earthly cares to live for the sake of God and His kingdom. So that's why we're exhorted to embrace, as the Lord and the apostles and the saints embraced, the practice of fasting in our lives. So with that, I'll conclude. Go ahead.
My question is related to an Orthodox friend who mentioned that during periods of fasting that there were days set aside where you could break your fast from certain items. Could you elaborate on that?
Specifically, if he is articulating the rule of the church accurately, what this means is that during a fasting season, and you can see it if you look on the church calendar, there are days on which a more strict abstinence is observed, and days on which a lighter abstinence is observed. For example, I'll just give you the pattern of Great Lent. Great Lent on the weekdays. The weekdays are always understood as Monday through Friday. Each one of those days is to be kept as a strict fasting day in which we limit ourselves to one meal, and at that meal there's no meat, eggs, dairy, fish, wine, and oil. Particularly on Wednesday and Friday, that meal is not to be taken until after the evening service, at which we receive Holy Communion, so that it does become literally a whole day fast that's broken by Holy Communion, and then we have our simple meal. Now, on Saturday and Sunday during Lent, there is a lighter rhythm, because in fact St. John Chrysostom says, he's using the image of the 40-year wandering of Israel in the desert. His 40 days of Lent are like that. We're journeying to reach the passion and resurrection of the Lord. But he says even the Israelites in the desert, they've had oases. So we need to come to the oasis every week as we go through Lent. So on the Saturday and Sunday during Lent, the fast is lightened. It doesn't stop completely, because if it's going to be a fasting season, there has to be this continuity of observance. But it's lightened. That's why the liturgy on the celebration of the Eucharist on Saturday and Sunday during Lent is in the morning, and after that the usual number of meals can be taken, and food cooked with oil, wine is allowed. So it's a lightening of the fast. And if you look. Even if you look on the description that you'll get of the fast during Advent, which is a much lighter rule than the Great Lent, you'll see that when sometimes a certain saint's day falls, like during Advent we have Feast of St. Andrew the Apostle, the Feast of St. Nicholas, Feast of St. Herman of Alaska. When they on those days that they fall, there is a certain lightening of the fast to celebrate the saint's day. That's how it works.
Another question, and that is, for us now who are going to be brought into the church, are we expected to be participating in these fasts, and if so, at what point?
Oh, you should begin to observe them now. Yeah, you should. Beginning with this, my recommendation would be, in addition to the fast of Advent, preparation for Christmas, which you should begin to observe as it is commonly observed in our church here, beginning on the 30th of November until Christmas Eve, doing as best you can, and remember, it is a standard, not a law. And sometimes, I don't know about your various backgrounds. Sometimes people come from a real legalistic background, and it takes a while to digest this thing of taking something seriously on the one hand that is not a law on the other hand. No one is evaluating how you're fasting. The priest, no priest, unless he's out of his mind, is going to ask you, and on such and such a day did you do such and such? It doesn't work like that. It's not. This is not an endurance contest, and nobody is standing over you, goading you on. This is something that must be voluntarily embraced out of love. Otherwise, it makes no sense. But on the other hand, love is not just an emotion; it is a commandment. So it is to be taken seriously. And the other thing that I would encourage you to begin observing, even though you are not as yet receiving Holy Communion, you soon will be. So it would be good for you to begin on Sunday not having anything before the Divine Liturgy, so that you're used to that rhythm when the time comes in just a few weeks for you beginning to receive Holy Communion.
Was there a practice that fast starts after Great Lent? Great Vespers on Saturday?
There has been, sometimes you hear people say that the fast, for example, to prepare oneself for Holy Communion, because the idea of this rhythm is that Holy Communion is to be the first food of the day, and therefore, since we say the day begins the evening before at Vespers, some people have said that therefore from the beginning of Vespers, that is when the Eucharistic fast should begin. although we would say that if a person does that in humility of heart, it's praiseworthy, one does not find confirmation of that throughout the literature of the Church. The common understanding is that when we get up in the morning, the Eucharist should be our first food from when we get up. And then, there is the understanding that the night before is a time of preparation for Holy Communion. That's why I mentioned before we began the class last time the importance of being in church for Vespers on Saturday evening, because that is indeed the beginning of the preparation for the Divine Liturgy. That it is not considered acceptable in Orthodox life to spend Saturday night out partying with the world. That's not what that night is for. It is the Lord's Day, something that if one is going to be a faithful, observant Orthodox Christian, has to be sacrificed on Saturday night in order to conform oneself to this rhythm of life that we have in the Church. But the total fast, for example, even in monasteries, frequently the evening meal is served after Vespers on Saturday evening. So you don't find a confirmation of this. I think it's a kind of extra thing that sometimes people have done because they wanted to, but it can't be described as something that's a universal expression of the Church's tradition. Yes, Kelly.
Wouldn't we be honoring the Wednesday and Friday fasts? That's the fast you would honor every week? And would that start tomorrow?
Well, yeah. That's you'll of course keeping the Wednesday and Friday fast. You'll see of course during a fasting season, the Wednesday and Fridays go on as they do throughout the year. So every Wednesday and Friday during the year is a fast day, except it's important to mention that we talked about the fasting seasons. There are also seasons in the Church where there is no fasting. We have to have the season of effort, but we also have to have the seasons of rejoicing, too. And in fact, for example, the period that begins with Pascha, from Pascha till Pentecost, in which there is no fasting and no kneeling, is longer than the period of fasting that precedes it. Likewise, when we come to Christmas, from Christmas Day and for the 12 days following, there's no fasting. So but unless it is a fast-free season, every Wednesday and Friday of the year is a fast day. How strictly the fast is to be kept on that day depends on other factors, as you can see in the church calendar. If a big saint's day comes on Wednesday and Friday, for example, I don't want to... sometimes people, especially at their first exposure to all this, they find it kind of overwhelming and complicated, and they think, I'm going to be more worried about trying to do this right than about any spiritual meaning it might have. I would urge you to be patient with yourselves. For example, tomorrow is commemoration of Saint Catherine, who has always been greatly honored in the Church, but it's also Wednesday. So how that works is that tomorrow it is not. The rule does not prescribe that we would not eat or drink nothing till the 9th hour and then have one meal, but rather because it is a day at which we celebrate the liturgy in memory of the saints or a saint early in the morning. Then from after the liturgy we can have our usual meals, but with abstinence. Wine and oil are allowed. But we wouldn't eat meat or dairy products or fish. That's what the rule prescribes. Now, also such factors as sometimes one Orthodox Christian is living in a house where he or she is the only one there. Sometimes adaptations have to be made. We have to do the best we are able and try to conform ourselves to the rule of the Church on the one hand, but on the other hand to not make it an end in itself. So it's always finding that middle way of sobriety that we're called to. I did spend the time that I spent on summarizing the rule because I think it's important for Orthodox Christians to know what this traditional rule is. oftentimes, and this has to be said too, among contemporary Orthodox, there is much laxity in the practice of fasting, especially in the Western world, because we're so used to affluence for eating what we want, when we want, how we want. We do that with our time too. I'll do what I want, when I want, how I want. So some people, you hear people even within the church. I don't mean so much in our local church, though I imagine you can find people everywhere who say various expressions of, this is the 20th century, we don't live like people did then, and this doesn't apply to me. And I would say that's a cop-out myself. I would say it's passing by something that's always been a very, very important expression of the life of the church. And it's going to, if dour and pedantic legalism is the one extreme, that kind of laxity and it doesn't apply to me is the other extreme.
Father David, as the Orthodox Church goes into away from the Mediterranean latitudes, how does the Church adapt in an island situation, for example, in the South Seas? Does the Church adapt its fasting techniques, but the principle remains the same?
Well, I would say that, officially, the rule as it is printed in the liturgical books of the Church, it's always been understood as applying to everybody in the same way, and that was true as the Church spread north and west. Whether from Spain to Russia, from Norway to Egypt, for many centuries, it was the same rule. Now, I would say that if there was a need for adaptation, people would probably do that. You hear, for example, especially in the past, the further north you went, that sometimes there wasn't access to fruits and vegetables, and there might be, but fish was very readily available, so they might eat more fish even on days when, strictly speaking, according to the rule, there wasn't supposed to be. That would be an adaptation. But you would never find the one thing that is really consistent, that the eating of what are considered to be those rich, fattening, luxurious foods, meat and dairy products, those always go on fast days and fasting seasons. There's witness to that universally from the beginning of there being a fasting rule in the Church. So, and in fact, people discover, just to speak personally, even before I became Orthodox, I started to study the history of the Church, and I discovered this practice of fasting, which in my own environment in the Roman Catholic Church had long been reduced to just a few kind of remnants of once what there was. And I very quickly discovered that, at least for me, I don't know, this might be different for other people, that the elimination simply of meat from the diet is really not that difficult to do. It's when you eliminate the other things that it begins to pinch a little bit, the way it needs to. That's how it is. Maybe for people who are inveterate carnivores, it's a far huger effort to go without the meat, but
Father David, do children fast?
Now that's yes, they do, but according to their ability. Now, and that has to be what I would say is, as with all aspects of the life of the Church, a child grows into them. And of course, there has to be the use of what I would call just plain common sense. An infant, of course, does not fast. A small child can. What I'll do is give descriptions, and these are another description of adaptations that go on. For example, a family who is keeping the fast pretty much according to the rule and has small children, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old children, or even maybe a little older. The children may do such things during a fasting season as not eat meat. But they may, for example, they may have some dairy products when their parents may not be having them. That's the thing that's typically done. As far as the fast before Holy Communion, of course, little infants don't do that either. Children as they grow up, as they grow older, usually in Orthodox families, as they see that their parents, and if they have older brothers and sisters, that they do not eat before Holy Communion, as a child grows, he'll begin to especially if he's taught about it with love, he'll want to do the same thing. Generally, a standard that's used is that a child that is old enough to begin to come to confession, to have the understanding of good and evil, and to come and to confess his sins and ask God's forgiveness, is at that point old enough to keep the Eucharistic fast and to begin to have some expression of what the rest of the church is doing. But there's no that has to be worked out in each individual case. So it's something that one grows into. Jeff?
In other words, should a child be allowed to make their own decision and come to their own decision about that, about fasting on before Eucharist?
Well, I think again that there has to be some common sense. That on the one hand, a child who is 8 or 9 years old, I'm just pulling that off the top of my head, is unless he or she has some physical condition that makes fasting impossible, is capable of going without food before the Eucharist. And so there does come a point where part of raising the child in the church is saying that must be done in the same way as other things must be done. But always what must be done in love. But there are things that must be done. Then I know I had this experience in my last parish of two energetic little boys who were determined that they were going to keep the absolute Paschal fast on Good Friday and Holy Saturday, and by their own decision, their parents and me said, "Oh, maybe it's too much for you, and maybe you should try just having a little bit of something." And they were determined to do it. One of them got sick. The other didn't. The other made it. So you should not, again, this is practical advice. The purpose of the fasts of the church are not to make us ill. However, on the one hand, on the other hand, there is a certain amount of physical discomfort that is involved in the observance of the fasts, and and one should not shun away from that. You have to see how it works in your life. Sometimes I've seen examples of this. People begin a fasting season, and they we joke now about we say the worst week of Lent is the first week. Because sometimes people begin fasting, and we're used to eating so much, most of us, far more than we need. So we reduce the richness of the food and reduce the amount we eat. And the initial response of our body is sometimes with hunger pains and headaches, and we think, oh, I can't go on with this because I'm just going to be sick. But often it's the case that it's just the body adapting to, and then we find out really that we need far less than we're used to function perfectly well on. So, Brian,
where could we get a copy of the? Is it the Didache?
The Didache. It's available in a number of places. There's a book called The Apostolic Fathers, collection of the Apostolic Fathers, translated by Father Jack Sparks. That's probably the most accessible one, available in the bookstore, no doubt. There are other. It's found in many printings. There's one, Early Christian Writings, I think, in Penguin series also has it. But if you just get the Apostolic Fathers and translated by Father Jack, and you'll find it there. Unless he does include the Didache in that, doesn't he? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so happy fasting. Blessed fasting. Let's stand and pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, now and ever and unto ages of ages. Amen. The blessing of the Lord be upon us in his grace and love for mankind, now and ever and unto ages of ages. Amen.